throwaway account. I'm currently sitting in a high-end hotel suite in London, looking at a painting that just sold for more than my entire family's net worth combined. Here is why you should never mock the crazy old man in your family who spends his time tinkering with code instead of real estate. My grandfather, Silas, 82, was always considered the disgrace of the Vane family. My father and my two uncles are all successful in the most boring ways possible: corporate law, commercial real estate, and industrial insurance. They measure a man's worth by the number of square feet he owns and the brand of watch on his wrist. Silas, on the other hand, was an artist. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, while his brothers were buying up property, Silas was obsessed with early computing. He was one of the first people to explore generative art, using primitive algorithms to create complex fractal-based images. To my family, he was just a man wasting his life on glorified calculators. They mocked him at every Christmas dinner. "Silas, when are you going to get a real job?" they'd ask, laughing as he tried to explain the beauty of a Mandelbrot set or the potential for digital scarcity. When Silas passed away last month, the vultures descended immediately. My cousins, Victor, 32, and Clara, 30, were already arguing over his vintage car collection and his small cottage in the countryside before the funeral service was even over. The reading of the will took place in Silas's dusty, cramped studio. The air smelled of ozone, old paper, and stale coffee. My father and uncle sat in the front row, looking impatient. "I, Silas Vane, being of sound mind," the lawyer began, "leave my physical property, the cottage and the vehicles, to be split equally between my brothers." Victor and Clara smirked. They were already calculating the resale value. "To my granddaughter Elena," the lawyer continued, looking at me with a soft smile, "I leave my life's work. This includes all my personal workstation hardware, my private servers, and the contents of the black lacquer box under my desk." The room erupted in laughter. Victor actually doubled over. "The life's work? You mean that pile of beige plastic and wires? Elena, congratulations. You're now the proud owner of a 40-year-old paperweight." "It's perfect," Clara added, checking her manicure. "The starving artist leaves his junk to the struggling designer. It's poetic, really." My father looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Elena, don't be upset. I'll buy you a new MacBook. We can just hire a junk removal service to clear out this mess so we can put the cottage on the market." But I wasn't upset. I looked at the beige plastic Victor was mocking. It was an original, custom-built terminal that Silas had tinkered with since 1984. Beside it was the black lacquer box. I felt a strange connection to it. I'm a digital illustrator, and Silas was the only one who ever encouraged me. He used to say, "Elena, the medium doesn't matter. The soul behind the pixels does." I stood up, my chin high. "I don't want a new MacBook, Dad. I'll take the hardware. I'll clear out the studio myself. Just give me the keys." "Suit yourself," Victor sneered. "Have fun in the junkyard. We're going to the cottage to start the inventory." They left, laughing and talking about the money they were going to make. I stayed in the studio, alone with the machines. I sat in Silas's old leather chair and opened the black lacquer box. Inside wasn't jewelry or cash. It was a single heavy-duty encrypted hardware key, YubiKey, and a handwritten note in Silas's messy script. "For Elena, they saw the shell, but you saw the ghost. The heart of the machine is yours. Don't let them tell you it's worthless. Remember, the first is always the rarest." I plugged the old machine into a modern power stabilizer I brought with me. The fans whirred, a deep mechanical growl that felt like a beast waking up after a long sleep. The screen flickered to life, showing a command prompt I hadn't seen in a decade. I didn't know it yet, but that pile of junk didn't just contain art. It contained the digital keys to an empire Silas had built in the shadows of the early internet, assets that were about to make the cottage and the cars look like pocket change. I've been in the studio for 48 hours straight. I haven't showered, and I've survived on cold coffee and energy bars. My cousins think I'm having a nervous breakdown in a room full of junk, but they have no idea that I just found the keys to a kingdom they can't even perceive. The old terminal, which I've dubbed the Behemoth, didn't just run on a standard operating system. Silas had built a custom kernel, a mix of early Unix and something entirely proprietary. When I inserted the YubiKey from the black lacquer box, the command prompt didn't just accept it, it transformed. The amber text turned a deep neon violet, and a single word appeared on the screen. "Genesis?" I typed, "Yes." Suddenly, the hard drives, ancient SCSI units that should have been dead decades ago, began to spin with a high-pitched whine. A directory tree unfurled like a digital flower. Thousands of files, all dated between 1988 and 1994. The file names were cryptic: aether.001.art, aether.002.art, solusgenesis.exe. I opened the first one. My modern laptop, which I had bridged to the Behemoth via a specialized serial to USB adapter, nearly crashed trying to render the file. It wasn't just a bitmap image. It was a self-executing piece of code. As it loaded, a fractal landscape of incredible complexity bloomed across my screen. It was beautiful, shifting with a mathematical grace that felt alive. Then I saw the logs. Silas wasn't just making art. He was part of an early, underground group of cryptographers and cypherpunks. He had developed a way to timestamp these digital pieces using a primitive version of what we now call a blockchain, long before Satoshi Nakamoto was even a name on a white paper. I found a text file titled The Ledger of Aether. My heart stopped as I read it. Silas hadn't just made 10,000 pieces of generative art. He had minted them on a private, distributed server network he had maintained for 30 years, using low-power solar nodes hidden in the cottage's attic and elsewhere. He called it digital scarcity. I did a quick search on a high-end art tech forum I frequent. My breath hitched. There were rumors of the Vane Genesis Collection, a legendary, mythical set of the first ever algorithmically generated art pieces that were immutably proven. One single piece, which had somehow leaked onto the market 5 years ago, had sold at a private Sotheby's auction for $450,000. Silas had the other $9,999. While I was staring at a screen worth more than a small country's GDP, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Victor. "Hey, loser, we just finished the appraisal on the car collection. The 1967 Jaguar is worth $200,000 alone. We're having steak tonight at the cottage. Hope you're enjoying your dusty wires. Don't forget to be out by Sunday so we can list the property." I looked at the text, then at the amber screen of the Behemoth. Victor was bragging about a $200,000 car. He had no idea that the dusty wires he left me were currently controlling a digital vault worth upwards of $500 million, depending on the market. But there was a catch. The Aether network required a final synchronization. The servers were dormant, waiting for a specific heartbeat signal that had to be sent from the cottage's attic, the very place Victor and Clara were currently clearing out. If they found the solar nodes and threw them away, thinking they were old radio equipment, the ledger of Aether would be lost forever. The art would still exist, but the proof of its Genesis status would vanish. I realized I had to get to the cottage. I had to protect the ghosts before my relatives sold the house they were haunting. I packed my gear, grabbed the Behemoth central processing unit, and headed for the door. As I drove toward the countryside, I saw a massive billboard for a digital heritage exhibition. It featured a low-resolution fractal that looked suspiciously like Silas's early work. The world was finally ready for what he had created, but they were looking for the creator. The starving artist wasn't a failure. He was a king who had hidden his crown in plain sight, waiting for the only person who valued the soul over the shell to find it.
Update. I made it to the cottage just as a massive industrial skip was being hauled onto the gravel driveway. My heart nearly stopped when I saw Victor carrying the box of old circuit boards toward the edge of the metal bin. This isn't just a fight for inheritance anymore. It's a fight to save the history of the digital world. The cottage looked like a battlefield. Victor and Clara had already started their modernization process, which mostly involved throwing anything that wasn't made of mahogany or leather into the trash. As I pulled my car in, tires screeching on the gravel, Victor stopped, holding a heavy, dust-covered metal chassis over the open skip. "Elena, back for more souvenirs?" He laughed, his voice booming across the lawn. "You're just in time. I was about to give this old radio junk to the landfill, unless you want to pay me for the scrap metal." I jumped out of the car, my eyes locked on the metal chassis. It was one of the 3 satellite nodes Silas had described in his logs. If Victor dropped it, the physical connection to the Aether network would be severed. "Victor, put it down," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline. "I told you I'd clear out the studio and the attic myself. That's part of my inheritance, remember? All hardware and personal workstation items." Clara walked out of the front door, wearing designer sunglasses and holding a glass of expensive wine. "Honestly, Elena, we're doing you a favor. This stuff is covered in mouse droppings and 30 years of grime. The realtor says the attic needs to be empty by Monday for the photography. We don't have time for your sentimental hoarding." "I don't care about the time," I said, walking toward Victor. I reached out and took the chassis from his hands. It was surprisingly heavy, filled with custom shielded components. The will was clear. "This is mine. I'll take it all today. Just stay out of my way." Victor shrugged. wiping his hands on his expensive jeans. "Fine, break your back if you want to. There's a whole wall of that junk behind the insulation in the north corner of the attic. Some kind of weird solar panel set up on the roof, too. The roofers are coming tomorrow to rip it off. If you want it, you've got 18 hours. I didn't wait for another word. I hauled the first node to my car and sprinted for the attic stairs. The attic was stiflingly hot and smelled of dry wood and ancient electronics. I pushed past piles of moth-eaten blankets until I found it, the heart of Aether. Behind a false panel in the insulation, 3 more nodes were humming with a faint rhythmic vibration. They were connected to thin fiber optic cables that ran through the roof to the solar tiles Silas had secretly installed decades ago. I set up the Behemoth CPU on a dusty old workbench and began the wiring process. My hands were shaking. I had to bridge a 1980s encrypted node with a modern interface while my cousins were downstairs laughing about their real riches. Establishing link, the Behemoth screen flickered. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the roof. The house shook. "Hey, Elena!" Victor shouted from below. "The roofers had a cancellation, so they started early. They're ripping off the old tiles now." My blood ran cold. "No, stop them!" I screamed, but the sound of power saws and hammers drowned me out. The solar tiles were being disconnected. The power to the nodes was dropping, 90%, 70%, 40%. The Behemoth screen began to fade, sync interrupted, data corruption imminent. I scrambled through my bag and found my high-capacity portable power bank. It was designed for a laptop, not a 40-year-old mainframe, but it was all I had. I stripped the wires with my teeth, my mouth tasting of copper and dust, and jammed them into the node's power intake. A spark flew, stinging my cheek. I held the wires in place with my bare hands. Heartbeat detected, synchronizing ledger. On the screen, a progress bar began to crawl. 1%, 2%, 5%. Downstairs, I heard Clara and Victor talking. "She's literally up there playing with wires while the roof is coming down," Clara said. "She's gone full Silas. We should probably call a doctor after we saw the house." "Let her be," Victor replied. "Once the roof is gone, she'll have to leave anyway. We've got the Jaguar, the cottage, and the cash. Elena has a box of scrap metal and a headache." I watched the progress bar. 45%, 60%, 80%. Every second felt like an hour. The saws on the roof were getting closer to the attic's north corner. Dust was falling from the ceiling like snow. Sync complete. 9,999 assets verified. Ownership transferred to Elena Vane. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The ledger was secure. The Vane Genesis Collection was officially mine, documented and proven on the most historic digital ledger in existence. I looked at the glowing purple screen. The junk in my car and this dusty attic was now worth $500 million. I had the power to buy the cottage, the Jaguar collection, and the entire neighborhood 10 times over. I packed the final note into my bag and walked down the stairs. I was covered in dust, my hands were bleeding from the wires, and my hair was a mess. Victor and Clara looked at me with pure condescending pity. "Done playing, Professor?" Victor mocked. "Actually, yes," I said, walking toward the door. I stopped and looked at Victor. "The Jaguar you're so proud of, it's a beautiful car, but you might want to check the market for Silas's junk on Monday. You're going to find that the only thing you inherited was the shell. I have the soul." I walked out to my car and drove away without looking back. On Monday, the world of art and finance was going to experience a 70 million volt shock, and I was going to be the one holding the switch.
Update. It is Monday morning. I am standing in the private lounge of one of the world's most prestigious auction houses. Outside, the media is in a frenzy. The Behemoth is sitting in the center of a glass-walled gallery, humming softly, while the world's top art critics stare at the violet screen in awe. My cousins? They've been trying to call me 47 times in the last hour. I didn't waste any time after the attic sync. I drove straight to a specialized law firm that deals with digital assets and intellectual property. By Sunday night, we had verified the ledger's authenticity with 3 independent cryptographic experts. The conclusion was unanimous. This was the holy grail of digital art. Silas Vane hadn't just made pictures, he had invented the concept of a digital original 20 years before anyone else. At 9 a.m. on Monday, the press release hit the wires. Vane Genesis Collection discovered 10,000 forgotten masterpieces of the 1980s to be auctioned. The response was a global earthquake. Within 2 hours, the junk I had hauled away in my dusty car was valued by experts at an initial floor price of $50,000 per piece. Do the math. That's a $500 million starting point. I was sitting in the gallery, watching a live stream of the local news when I saw them. Victor and Clara were standing outside the cottage, which was now half demolished by the roofers.
they were surrounded by reporters. "Mr. Vane, Mrs. Vane," a journalist shouted, thrusting a microphone into Victor's face. "The Vane Genesis Collection is being hailed as the most significant art find of the century. As the heirs to the Vane estate, how does it feel to know your grandfather's life's work is worth $500 million?" Victor looked like he had been hit by a freight train. His face was a ghostly white, his mouth hanging open. Half a billion?" he stammered. "But it was just old computers. Elena took the computers. We have the car." "The car?" the reporter laughed. "The car is worth $200,000. One single Aether file just sold in a pre-auction private bid for $1.2 million. Are you saying you gave the digital assets to your cousin?" Clara pushed forward, her designer sunglasses perched precariously on her head. "There's been a mistake. The will was misleading. We are the primary heirs. Elena stole that hardware. She manipulated us into letting her take it." I smiled at the screen. I had the recording of them calling it junk and scrap metal in front of the lawyer. I had the document where they explicitly waived their rights to hardware and workstation items in favor of the physical property. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. It was a FaceTime call from Victor. I decided to answer. "Elena!" Victor's voice was a scream. He was pacing in front of the cottage, gesturing wildly at the dumpster where he had tried to throw the notes. You knew what was on those machines. You're a thief. We're calling the lawyers. We're contesting the will." "Contesting what, Victor?" I said, my voice calm and ice cold. "You called it beige plastic. You called it trash. I have it all on video. I offered to clear the studio so you could sell the house faster, remember? You were so busy counting the pennies from the Jaguar that you ignored the gold mine in the attic." "Elena, listen." Clara's face appeared in the frame, her voice now dripping with fake, desperate sweetness. "We're family. We were just joking in the studio. We can split this. We'll help you manage the auction. We can all be billionaires." "We are family, Clara," I replied. "And as family, Silas knew exactly who would appreciate his soul and who would only see the shell. You got the cottage and the car. I got the life's work. That was his wish. Enjoy your Jaguar. I have an auction to attend." I hung up. In the gallery, the first auction lot began. Aether_001, the Genesis piece. The bidding started at $1 million. Within 3 minutes, it hit $4 million. The art world was celebrating Silas. They were calling him a digital prophet. They saw the beauty in the fractals that my father and uncles had mocked for 40 years. As I watched the numbers climb on the digital board, I realized Silas hadn't just left me money. He had left me a weapon, a way to show the world that the dreamers and the starving artists are the ones who actually build the future.
Final update. It's been 6 months since the hammer fell on the final lot of the Vane Genesis auction. I'm writing this from the window seat of the restored cottage. Outside, the garden is no longer a construction site. It's a protected heritage site. Here's the final report on how the starving artist redefined our family's history. The auction wasn't just a sale, it was a cultural shift. The total revenue from the 10,000 assets exceeded $620 million. After taxes and the creation of the Silas Vane Foundation for Digital Arts, I found myself in control of a fortune that made my father's commercial real estate empire look like a lemonade stand. But the money was never the point. The point was the legacy. The fate of the cousins. Victor and Clara's downfall was a slow-motion wreck fueled by their own arrogance. They tried to sue me, of course. They spent 4 months and hundreds of thousands of dollars on lawyers, trying to argue that the digital assets were separate from the hardware Silas left me. It didn't work. My legal team played the recording from the reading of the will, the one where Victor laughed and called the machines beige paperweights and scrap metal. The judge actually laughed during the hearing. He ruled that by explicitly rejecting the hardware and mocking its value, they had waived any claim to its contents. To make matters worse, because they had already started the demolition of the cottage's roof before the legal title was fully transferred, they were hit with massive fines for unauthorized destruction of potential cultural heritage. To pay their legal fees and fines, Victor had to sell his beloved 1967 Jaguar. Clara had to liquidate her jewelry collection. They ended up with less than $50,000 each after everything was settled. The last I heard, Victor is working as a junior agent for a low-end rental company, and Clara is trying to build a career as an influence consultant, though nobody is hiring her. They inherited the shell, and as I predicted, the shell cracked. The cottage and the studio. The biggest irony? I bought the cottage. I didn't do it directly. I used a shell company to bid on it when Victor and Clara were forced to sell it to cover their debts. They thought they were selling it to a luxury developer. Imagine their faces when they saw the sign go up. The Silas Vane Digital Art Sanctuary. I've turned the cottage and the original studio into a world-class residency for digital artists. The Behemoth, the old terminal, is now the center of a glass-enclosed exhibit in the main hall. It's no longer a pile of junk. It's a relic of the birth of an era. We even restored the solar tile roof, making the entire site carbon neutral, just as Silas intended. The legacy. My father and uncles haven't spoken to me in months. They can't handle the fact that the failure of the family is now its most famous member. Silas is now studied in universities. His fractals are displayed in the MoMA and the Louvre. People look at his work and see the complexity of the universe, the beauty of math, and the foresight of a man who lived 40 years in the future. As for me, I'm still an illustrator. But now I don't struggle. I spend my days helping young artists understand that their tools, their tablets, their code, their pixels, are just as sacred as oil and canvas. Last night, I sat in the attic where I once fought to save the zinc. It's quiet now. I opened the black lacquer box and found a hidden compartment I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a small USB drive with a single file labeled Elena's Masterpiece. I plugged it into my modern workstation. It wasn't an old file. It was a program Silas had written in his final days. It was a generative algorithm that used my own past illustrations as a training set. As I watched, the screen filled with a portrait of Silas and me, standing together in a field of digital lupines. It was perfect. It was a collaboration across time. I realized then that Silas didn't just leave me a fortune. He left me a conversation that will never end. He proved that greed sees only the price tag, but love sees the value. The machine still hums in the hall below. The ghosts are happy. And for the first time in my life, I know exactly what I'm worth.